Thank you, everyone. We're back on the record. Is the court reporter with us?
I am here.
Thank you. We'll now continue with the appearance by the group parties and intervenors and the secret intervenors, which will be Winnett, Mark and Michelle Greengarden, and the Oshner Place LLC. Will the group parties and intervenor and secret intervenors present their witness panel for the purpose of taking the oath? Attorney Bachman will administer the oath.
Good afternoon. This is Keith Ainsworth for Winnett. I just want to know for the record, in the list of pre-filed testimony, there was the pre-filed testimony of Richard Feldman. That was to be submitted as limited appearance testimony and will not be sworn for cross-examination. So just wanted to make that note for the record. But with me, I have the Winnett team of David Maxon from Isotrope Radio Frequency Consulting Firm. I have George Logan and Sigrun Gadwa of REMA Ecological, Wetland Soil Scientists and Natural Resources Specialists. Edgar Smith, the videographer from Geomatrix, who performed the drone flight neighborhood test, and Marie Grattan, the executive director of Winnett, who prepared the responses to the interrogatories and can answer questions of those, and Mark Greengarden, a resident of Woodbridge, who obtained the photographs in the interrogatory responses. So with that, I would like to ask each of the panelists, did each of you, at my direction, prepare the reports that bear your names or the interrogatory responses or the drone flight video, as the case may be, that appear in the hearing program? And
Attorney Ainsworth,
yes.
Could we swear in the witnesses before they respond to your questions, please?
That would be appropriate, yes.
Thank you. If all the witnesses could please just raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear or sincerely affirm, as the case may be, that the evidence you shall give concerning this case is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, or upon penalty of perjury?
I do.
I do.
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Ainsworth, Attorney Ainsworth, before you proceed,
Yes, sir.
Sigrun Gadwa, was she on your list?
Yes, she was the co-author of the REMA report. Actually, the primary author.
And is she available for cross-examination?
Yes, she is. She's appearing. I see her on one of the boxes here on the Zoom video.
Okay, very good. She's been sworn in.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and how about Shelley Greengarden?
We're substituting, we're using, it was Mark and Shelley who were working together, but Mark will be providing the testimony for the Greengardens.
Very good. Thank you for that clarification. Please continue.
Okay. So I'm going to ask, did each, and I will poll you each, but did each of you at my direction prepare the reports that bear your names or the interrogatory responses or the drone flight video of the tower location neighborhood that appears in the hearing program? David Maxon?
Yes.
George Logan?
Yes.
Sigrun Gadwa?
Yes.
Edgar Smith?
Yes.
Marie Grattan?
Yes.
Mark Greengarden?
Yes.
Thank you. Do any of you have corrections, deletions, or additions to the materials that you prepared? David Maxon?
I have one clarification, and that's the street number of the address that I located as number 15 Meeting House Lane. Looking at the assessor's cards, that parcel is parcel 11, number 11 Meeting House Lane, and it has 3 buildings on it, which are numbered 11, 17, and 15.
Thank you. Do you have any other additions, corrections, or deletions?
I do not.
Okay. Mr. Logan?
I do not.
Ms. Gadwa?
I do not have any corrections. I could provide full copies of some of the references that are in my report if the commission so desired, if the council so desired. So I could have additions if that was desired.
Okay, but You're referring to citations that you've made within the report, correct?
Yeah, I've cited reports and given a one or two brief sentences on the findings, but if the council wanted to see the whole report, I could provide that as well.
Understood. Okay. Edgar Smith,
Yes.
any deletions or corrections?
No, the video is complete and I stand by it.
Thank you. Marie Grattan
No corrections, no deletions, no changes.
and Mr. Greengarden.
No corrections.
Thank you. And do all of you adopt the materials that you submitted under your names as your testimony before this council today as true and accurate copies of the matters in question? David Maxon,
Yes.
George Logan,
Yes.
Sigrun Gadwa,
Yes.
Edgar Smith,
Yes.
Marie Grattan,
Yes.
and Mark Greengarden.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I submit the panel for cross-examination.
Thank you, Attorney Ainsworth. Does any party or intervener object to the admission of Winnett, Mark and Michelle Greengarden, and Oshner Place LLC exhibits? Attorney Baldwin.
Yes, Mr. Morissette, I do object, but only as it relates to Winnett's exhibit number 6. A significant portion of the REMA report relates to radio or frequency electromagnetic radiation as it relates to the wildlife report. Neither Mr. Logan nor Ms. Gadwa are experts in this field. They cannot testify or subject themselves to cross-examination regarding issues related to radio frequency emissions. I would also point out that issues related to radio frequency emissions are under the exclusive jurisdiction of the Federal Communications Commission and not this council. I would ask that Section 4.2 and any of the remaining conclusions in the REMA report as it relates to the impact of radio frequency emissions of the proposed facility be stricken from the report and not included in this record.
I may respond.
Thank you, Mr. Baldwin. Attorney Ainsworth, go ahead. Go respond, please.
First, Ms. Gadwa and Mr. Logan have submitted their resumes. They are actual wildlife and natural resources specialists. While not physicists and approaching RF radio frequency emissions from the physics standpoint or the technical standpoint, they are actually experts in how these kinds of things impact wildlife. And I think they could be asked questions on that point to establish their credibility on that point. And then number two, the exclusive jurisdiction of the FCC on radio frequency emissions, they actually have a prohibition on the or preemption on the radio frequency emissions as to human health, but the impacts on wildlife are still very much a part of the jurisdiction of this council in balancing the environmental impacts.
That's not true. There is case law that actually comes out of the state of Connecticut that Ms. Bachman is aware of that states very clearly that health effects are both for human and wildlife. And we can certainly include that in our brief at the end. But I disagree. I think Mr. Ainsworth kind of doubled back on himself. He said that Ms. Gadwa and Mr. Logan are wildlife experts and aren't experts in physics or medical science. But then he said that they can speak about environmental health effects related to wildlife simply because of their wildlife background. But we're talking about impacts of radio frequency emissions on wildlife. That's the part that they are not experts in, and this evidence should be stricken from the record.
Thank you, Attorney Baldwin, and thank you, Attorney Ainsworth. Attorney Bachman, do you wish to comment?
Thank you, Attorney Morissette, or Mr. Morissette. Attorney Baldwin is correct. There is citing council case law, Yeager versus Connecticut Citing Council, that did determine that this council has no authority and is preempted by the FCC on the effects of radio frequencies on human health and wildlife. That being said, Ms. Godwa and Mr. Logan's resumes are in the record. They are wildlife experts, and with the understanding that this council is preempted and considering the effects of radio frequencies and the emissions on the wildlife, we could continue and let the information in for what it's worth rather than separating it from the report and proceed as planned, Mr. Morissette. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Bachman. Being that it is an integral part of the report and it would be difficult to separate at this point, we will allow it in for what it's worth. And we will continue. Anything else, Attorney Baldwin?
Nothing further, Mr. Morissette. Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney Pimentel.
No further objections from the town's perspective, Mr. Morissette.
Thank you. We therefore will allow the exhibits in, and section 4.2 of the REMA report will be in the record for what it's worth. Thank you. We will now begin with cross-examination of Winnett, Mark and Michelle Greengarden, and Oshner Place LLC by the council, starting with Mr. Mercier. Mr. Mercier.
Thank you. I'm going to quickly refer to Winnett's responses to council interrogatories. That's hearing program item number 4. I have a question for Mr. Greengarden based on one of the photographs attached to that document. It was a photograph on page, actually it's listed as 15 Soundview Drive. That's PDF number page 17, if you're going on online resources. Essentially, it shows a crane amongst some pine trees and some paved surfaces in front. So, Mr. Greengard, I'm just trying to determine, is the paved area shown in the foreground, is that your driveway or is that Soundview Drive?
That is from our driveway. I was standing in front of our garage.
Okay. And then there's a paved area going across the page, horizontally looking at it. Is that Soundview Drive or is that also your driveway?
That is our driveway.
Okay, the whole thing. Okay.
I don't know if we're looking at the right thing.
You're talking about page 18, correct?
There's no page number on it. It says basically at the top of the page, 15 Soundview Drive. It says the proposed tower is approximately 200 feet from 15 Soundview Drive property line. That's the page I'm looking at.
Tell me to ask a question.
Okay, I'm trying to. Okay, yeah, I see which picture you're referring to. That is our driveway. Our driveway is circular. Okay. So yes, that is all from our driveway.
Yeah, there's like a little lamp there. There's a snowbank.
Yes. So
okay, thank you very much.
My garage was to my back when I took the photo. Mm-hmm.
And I suppose the next photo is also from your property, is in front of your garage. Is that a zoom through the trees across towards the tower?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. The other pictures are self-explanatory. Thank you very much.
Oh.
I have a few questions regarding the video and the letter produced by Geomatrix. That's hearing program item number 7. Mr. Smith.
Yes.
I read the letter and it basically stated that you use application material from Verizon to decide on the placement and the scale of the tower. What documents are we referring to? Are you referring to the visibility analysis itself that was provided in the application? Or are you referring to the site plan?
I downloaded the docket. I was referred to by the the group, the Newton Conservation Trust, to the docket, and I downloaded that, and I looked at a artist's rendition of the tower, and I looked at a site plan, and then included in that docket were photos of the crane, and we relied heavily on the photos of the crane in finding
Okay.
landmarks.
Okay, for the photo simulations that you produce inside the video, there's also, I think there's 2 snippets on your letter. Is that correct? Those 2 photos on your letter, are those
Yes.
just snippets of the video?
Yes, that was showing the type of comparisons that we did.
Okay. So for the video itself, how did you incorporate the height of the tower for the photo simulation that you used in the video?
We found landmarks and determined based on those landmarks how the tower would appear from the vantage that the video was shot at.
For the height of the tower itself and the video, did you use the crane itself to determine how to set the height?
We did. We used the point at the crane that seemed to be holding the broadcasting equipment to as a benchmark for where the tower would be. We didn't have access to the private property on which it was set, so normally would have taken a measurement. We relied on the accuracy of the crane height to be represented in the video.
Okay, so just so I understand, you used the top of the crane to set the height of the tower in your simulation. Is that correct?
Yeah, it appeared in my photo that there was equipment hanging from the crane, and we presumed that equipment would represent the height of the tower.
You say equipment, that's like something that was attached slightly below the crane tip?
Yes, that's what I assumed in my work that equipment represented equipment attached to the tower at a similar height. So yes, I think my answer to your question is yes.
Okay, so the top of the tower you used in your simulation, that was the top of the crane, not the stuff that was hanging off the crane. Is that correct?
No, I judged that what was being represented by the crane was the equipment hanging from it at the height that it would be in the tower.
Okay, got it. Thank you. You have an estimate yourself as to what height that the balloon or equipment hanging off the tower was? Do you know how high that it was off the ground?
Again, we used benchmarks and angles, but my understanding was that it was approximately 100 feet high.
Did you get that information from someone that told you, or you just measured it?
I did not measure it. I'm not sure whether I read it or whether it was told to me. We discussed the tower with members of the group.
Okay. Now, the letter states when you use the photo simulation itself of the tower, someone provided you with an image.
That's correct.
All right. Do you know who provided that to you?
It came to me through Marie Pratt. It's a stock photo.
Okay, it's a stock photo, so it's not here. It's not a site in Connecticut. We don't know.
It's not a specific site. It was it was presented to me as deemed to be representative of the type of tower that would be in.
Okay. The simulation shows 3 antenna arrays on it, which you use in your video.
Yes.
You know anything about the vertical separation of the antenna arrays? You know how far they are spaced apart?
No.
Were you aware that the tower was proposed at 100 feet high?
Again, I judge the simulations are based on angles and benchmarks from the existing tower. Since we didn't have exact measurements, we essentially didn't plug in a height. We estimated it by how it appeared from various vantage where we had photos. So that there was no use of that 100-foot, but it was my understanding that it was a 100-foot tower. I went into it with that understanding.
Okay, I think it is previously said that you assume that the attachment to the crane was you believe it was 120, and that would be representative of the tower. Correct?
I'm not sure I said that, but I essentially I presumed that the equipment hanging from the crane would be the height of the tower, and the simulation represents a tower where the equipment would be at that height, whatever that height is.
Okay, my apologies. That was I understand now. Thank you. So you didn't know what height the material was hanging from the tower. I don't know if it was 120 or 120.
I do not know if the crane hung the equipment at a different height than the tower is proposed. I do not have that answer.
Okay, thank you. Regarding let's look at the photograph attached to your letter. There was photo simulation from 110 Newton Road.
Mm-hmm.
And is that simulation based on that balloon height?
No, the location of the tower between the trees is based on that. The simulation we did is from the porch of Tim, I forget his last name's home, and the photo is actually taken. You can see the roof of the shed. You're standing somewhat closer in that. So we were not using the height of that balloon.
Again, how did you determine, if you didn't use the balloon as a benchmark, how did you determine the height of the tower in that area?
We compared it to the trees and the angle based on photos that we had from Newton Road and from Tim's house of the crane.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have any other questions on this at this moment.
Thank you.
Can I clarify something for you?
Yes, please.
Your question in reference to where I took the photo that explained 15 Soundview Drive, that was where the tower was originally going. If the tower is shifted, like Mr. Morissette recommends, or referred to, it would even be closer view from that location than what the picture depicts.
Thank you, Mr. Greengard.
Mr. Mercier, does that conclude your questioning or do you have more?
I have a couple of questions on the wildlife report.
Thank you.
Ms. Godwa, I was looking at your report on page, let's see here, 3, in the first section, 3.1, it basically states that the property is part of an established wildlife corridor, and you have an attached figure 1. Let me go up here.
Mhm.
For a second, thank you. So what type of information do you have to determine that this actually is a wildlife corridor? As you have drawn it on your figure 1.
Well, I have several sources. First, looking at aerial photographs taken in different seasons, seeing where there's a relatively broad swaths of continuous forested cover, wide gaps between houses, and then what the large blocks of open space are, both to the north and to the south. You can see a disturbance-sensitive wild animal would choose to move along that corridor, as opposed to through either the subdivision to the north or the south or along the road. And so that's one source. And the other source is the number of unusual shy and the frequency of sightings of unusual shy wildlife by Timothy Mulheron, including black bear, bobcat, gray fox. Just he sees wildlife very often to the north of his house, in that mature forested corridor that straddles the big stone wall along the property line.
Mr. Morris said, excuse me, Ms. Godwa, I apologize. I need to object. Ms. Godwa this is hearsay evidence. Mr. Lorraine could be a part of the witness panel. He is not. What he does,
he provided photographs.
What he does or doesn't see is something that he should testify to, not Ms. Godwa.
Well, he did provide photographs, and they are in the report.
But could the witness please keep the testimony associated with the facts that are known by you,
okay,
not by others? Thank you.
Yeah. But the main thing is this is something a landscape ecologist does is to just get a large scale aerial photograph and see where the connecting swaths of minimally developed land are, and the ridge tops, this early successional habitat along the ridge top of the owner of the cell tower property goes from the mountain to the northeast down to the big preserve to the south.
Okay, thank you. I just have a couple of questions on the dotted corridor itself. So you basically said that you've done a desktop survey of a potential wildlife corridor, right?
Not just desktop. I also drove around the area, took a look at the sizes of the trees, the density of the understory, and just to get a feel from a windshield survey, shall we say, from the roads. And of course, the side of the I was on the Mulheron property and walked all along the property boundary there and saw the site from that angle.
Okay. Again, based on your image here, in your drive around and a review of some leaf-off condition imagery, does your wildlife corridor actually along Newton Road there, where it leads across from Burnt Swamp Road? That's the triangle on the map there. Doesn't that actually go down one or two driveways, paved driveways with an intervening stone wall?
These are very narrow driveways, unpaved or at least very narrow, and they're bordered by mature trees on both sides. So they're not an obstacle to wildlife passage, not like a 40-foot paved driveway or something, or 20, even 25-foot paved driveway. These are old, narrow driveways.
Right, but they're next to each other, correct?
Yeah, but there's vegetation in between them.
All right, so when animals are moving around generally from place to place, do they prefer areas with vegetative cover?
Well, it depends on the time of day, and also depends on the animal. A small animal will prefer vegetative cover because it keeps it protected from hawks or owls or other predators. A larger animal will often use roads or trails to expend less energy as they travel. So it depends on the animal, and it also depends on whether there's a full moon out, whether it's really bright. Then they'll be more likely to only stay under vegetative cover, and on a dark night without a moon, they'll walk in open areas.
Okay, thank you. Well, since the animals kind of walk down, well, in this case, they'll be walking down a driveway or two or next to residences. So they're really not too shy with man-made structures, correct?
Well, the residences are not very, very close at all to the driveways. They're back, and there's intervening vegetation.
Okay. Now, given the placement of the tower on this parcel, how there was a statement on I believe page 2 of your report that you said that the tower site is going to adversely impact wildlife movement along this wildlife corridor. But if animals are already using man-made structures for travel, how would this structure block or impede their movement across the landscape here?
Well, the research shows that perhaps not all kinds of animals haven't been tested, but many animals have what's called an aversive reaction to the low frequency radiation. It upsets them, it repels them, and they get disoriented, and they are likely to avoid using that corridor.
Okay, so I'll just interrupt for a second. I'm just concerned about the physical structure itself. So the structure itself and the fence compound wouldn't really impede their movement across the property, right? The wildlife.
There was one photograph in the report. There's a good deal of understory vegetation. There's a shrub stratum, and there are tall herbaceous and vines as well, and plenty of trees of different sizes, which are block the view. So that there's and the dense vegetative cover is on both sides of the property line, both sides of the stone wall. So there is cover for wildlife movement or an open driveway, depending on what the animal prefers.
Okay. There's also an alternative side on the property, basically in the middle of the meadow, away from the shrub cover. So that would benefit some animals that prefer shrub cover. Is that correct? That want to move through there.
Yeah. I didn't go to the far side of the property. I was only on the Mulherron side. So there's certainly the property is dotted with early successional shrubs and saplings, and so there is cover there.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mercier. We will continue with cross-examination by Mr. Edelson, followed by Mr. Silvestri. Mr. Edelson.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Morissette. I'll continue with questions for Ms. Godwell. In your report, you use the term the zone of influence. That's not a term I'm familiar with. Can you define how a zone of influence is determined?
Well, not the wavelength, but the energy level of the radiation has been measured at various distances from cell towers, and it declines with distance. And I actually, this was an important question, and I really wanted to find out a good answer, and I researched it. I looked at publications from WHO and multiple sources, and I know that some studies were saying 600 feet was the 200 meters, 600 feet. Beyond that, the electromagnetic field was no longer able to be detected by wildlife. Others were saying that 450 feet, basically 100 meters. So just to be conservative, it depends a lot on the intensity of the particular collection of antennae that are being used on a particular cell tower. I use the distance of 450 feet.
Mr. Morissette, excuse me, I'm sorry. I have to object again, just to renew our objection. Ms. Godwell has no expertise or experience in this field, and she's talking as if she does. And I think the record needs to indicate that she's not an expert in the field of radio frequency emissions and can't be answering these questions. She's just not qualified.
I agree, Attorney Baldwin. Mr. Edelson, if you could change your line of questioning, something that is more appropriate for the witness to answer. She is not a qualified candidate to respond to RF questions. Thank you.
I think I understand. Maybe just put it in terms of feet. When you use the terminology zone of influence, what distance, what radius are you using from the center of the cell tower to determine that geographical zone?
I'm using the distance that the majority of studies that are cited in the review papers we're using at about 450 feet.
Let me just say, your terminology of shy animals really challenges me to say, how are you determining that? I live in a neighborhood that is far more dense and populated than this area of Woodbridge. And we have plenty of bears, we have plenty of herons, we have plenty of foxes, we have lots of other animals. And I don't understand how you come to the determination of what is a shy animal and why you picked on those particular ones. Can you help me understand how you determine what animals are shy and what animals are not shy? And I should say, when it comes to bears, I wish they were shyer. But when they're on my back patio of my condominium, I don't determine them to be shy.
I think of course, there's within a population, there's individual variability depending on their experiences, and a species that is normally shy can have individuals that are acclimated to people and have not had any bad experiences with them, and their behavior becomes not shy. But there's in an area where there's basically a matrix of residential development in all directions. and not a high frequency. There's certain species that are only observed occasionally, and that forage and hibernate and complete their life cycle, mate in larger open space areas. For birds, it's breeding is the key thing. Like there are area sensitive birds that only nest and breed in tracts that are over 200 acres typically, but they'll migrate through, and you'll see them during migration in any suburban area. So you have to look at what activities do they do in what areas, and what food is available for them in those areas. And I'm sure on the hill to the northeast, and I forget the name of it, it's on the map there, that I presume that has oak trees and blueberries, and that's a good foraging habitat, a natural appropriate foraging habitat for black bear. And that would be somewhere where they'd be their core habitat, where they'd be centered.
Well, let me offer you that animals adapt, and the animal populations we see here in Connecticut now are constantly adapting. We used to not have bears, and now we do have bears. So for you to determine that certain animals are shy is really an artifact of a particular time. And I don't think it can be made as a definitive statement. But let me shift to something else. You use the term corridor to determine, based, if I understand correctly from your answers to Mr. Mercier, from an observation of where there was habitat between preserves or areas that were, let's say, more open space and reserved for use by wildlife. Does that corridor have any status vis-a-vis designated as a wildlife corridor by the federal government, the state government, or the town of Woodbridge? Or is that just your observation?
Yeah, the vast majority of wildlife corridors.
Please, I don't want an explanation. I want to know its status. Who determined that that's a wildlife corridor?
Well, portions of it are protected, like the city, I think the park just to the south is definitely.
Okay, then let me ask specifically within this residential neighborhood.
Not.
Within this residential neighborhood, has it been determined as a corridor? Specifically, let me say a corridor for not development. There are properties in all directions of this site. Are any of that area designated as a wildlife corridor?
Not to my knowledge, but
Thank you.
I wanted to add one thing, that wildlife corridors are not just movement corridors. They are habitat foraging areas that are used by moving animals and by temporary residents as well. And my real focus in the report was just the number of really sizable, healthy, and the diversity of mature trees along that swath, and the variety of birds that are using that. And animals.
With all due respect, you made the point about the zone of I forgot the term.
I made the closeness of the
influence based on radiation, not based on habitat. And I realize we've already covered the issue of radiation and your expertise on that. But that's how you determine the influence zone. That's the subject of your report. But I think I'd like to move on to just go back to the geometrics.
Excuse me, Mr.
Edelson.
Excuse me, Mr. Edelson, before you continue. Mr. Logan is also co-author of the REMA report. And I see that he may have some additional information if you would like.
Certainly, I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to be very brief. I was just going to agree with my colleague and associate, Sigmund Godwin. And the interesting thing is you talked about bear, and we talked about, we have some photographs of bobcat and bear. We talked about fox, et cetera, in the report. But that's the interesting part. Those are not the shy species, because those are the ones we saw, right?
She was the one who said they were shy.
I'm not saying that they're particularly shy. What I'm saying is that the ones that we didn't see, that were not inventoried, that we don't know about, which I expect as a wildlife biologist are there, like gray fox, like some of the weasel species, those are the ones that are shy.
Thank you, Mr. Logan. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Edelson, but please continue.
Appreciate it. It's hard with Zoom to know, who would like to speak. So I appreciate your pointing that out. I wanted to go back to the photographs that were in the letter from Geomatrix, and specifically, let's see if I can get it up here in front of me. The one that's labeled neighborhood 150-yard radius. Make sure I understand what's in there. And obviously it's addressed to Mr. Smith. The photograph on the left, I guess I'd say on the left, bottom left, shows some lines going across the top. Do you know what those lines are?
This is Mr. Smith. You are looking at the very bottom of my letter.
Right, just above your signature, if you will.
Just above my signatures. Those are telephone lines, and we are somewhat closer than that photograph was taken by one of the residents when the tower was up. And then my simulation is shot from somewhat closer. You can see the same mailbox, number 14, is further back. So if you look right below the L of simulation, you can see the same telephone lines, and they are higher in the photograph because we are closer to the mailbox.
So if you had been able to capture a photograph on the right with the same perspective as the one on the left, we would have seen the cell tower obstructed by what you say are telephone lines. Although maybe I should first ask the question, are you aware of the area, the residential area, being serviced completely by above ground utility lines, or are there underground utility lines for electric, cable, and telephone?
I have no knowledge of the power in Woodbridge.
So you weren't trying to give us the impression in the simulation that the tower would somehow replace those telephone lines, as you referred to them.
I had no intention of any impression like that. I was trying to show the tower as it would appear from the photograph that we took.
And it's one of the things I should point out that we appreciate when people put a simulation together, that they make all possible efforts to use the same perspective so that we know that we are, I think as Mr. Mercier alluded to, comparing apples and apples.
Yeah.
So this is it's disappointing when we see a picture that can give an impression that certain features all of a sudden are gone.
Well, I think you're looking at my letter and not the video, where the lines are not shown against the blue sky and are not quite as visible. But the video this is an explanation of the video, and it's not intended to be side by side comparison of photos. It was intended to show you how our methodology in determining how the tower would appear to residents, and that is really the purpose of the video, is a experiential representation of how the tower would be perceived.
And unfortunately, I must say I had trouble watching the video and saying, am I really looking at a good simulation or not? So, but I appreciate your effort. I would like to turn to Mr. Maxson now. Mr. Maxson, as I understand your testimony here, you feel that there are two sites that are within the town, owned by the town, that would provide as good or actually a better service with less visual impact. Has the town contacted you for assistance in putting together an RFP for a developer to come in and develop or actually propose to build on those sites?
No, it has not.
Now, I believe it's in your testimony, and we've talked about this before at other dockets, with regard to towns of similar areas that have used the distributed antenna systems. And that town that we talked about before was on Martha's Vineyard. Chilmark, I believe is the name. Do you have any updates, testimony, or information that could help us understand the experience of that site? Now that we're, I think, 10 or 11 years since they implemented it.
Well, I think the information provided in the Kent hearing was as up to date as the information I have today.
So nothing new since then.
There are other locations in hilly terrain that have those sorts of things, but
you must have read my mind, because that was my next question. Have you become aware of other? Can you provide to the council the name of any other towns that you've become aware of with terrains, let's say, similar to Woodbridge and similar demographic density to Woodbridge that have successfully implemented this technology?
The distributed antenna system technology. Yeah, as things happen when you get off a call and you remember something else you could have mentioned. I recall that I worked, I think it's probably more than a decade ago at this point, with the township of Lower Merion, Merion, Pennsylvania, which was dealing with a proposal to put a cell tower in the middle of a pretty dense but higher end residential area north of Philadelphia, in a spot that was pretty stark. And the townspeople got together and fought it, and the town worked with the applicant to ultimately to get a distributed antenna system in that obviated the need for that tower. And that's a very hilly terrain there.
Anything else besides Lower Merion?
Top of my head, I didn't make a list for this meeting because I didn't think I was going to be testifying about distributed antenna systems, but I could certainly do more to fill out the record if you're looking for a larger list of towns with those kinds of systems.
Well, I think it might not apply to this particular docket at this point, but I think it would be helpful to the council, because we have spent a lot of time looking at that as an alternative in various dockets, and having some real world experience one way or another would be, I think, helpful. So separate question, Mr. Maxon. Obviously, you and the applicant were having using different models, and coming into this meeting today, I was concerned about our ability as a council to determine, well, whose propagation model and mapping is the right one, because they both seem to be looking at the same area and coming up with differences. But if you will, the applicant seems to have done something new for me, maybe not for others, in actually putting a transmitter up on a crane and then measuring that, and as you saw in those two maps. And so I would like to give you a chance to comment on that approach, and if you think that basically settles the case, that the radio frequency signal is best in terms of coverage from the applicant site. Put the modeling questions to the side, if you will.
Okay, well, since we don't have any drive testing from the proposed heights at the alternative sites, we don't have an apples to apples comparison. I think it's important to recognize when you're looking at these wonderful colored computer plots that are predicting coverage using pretty standard underlying data with terrain and clutter and those kinds of things, and then standard propagation algorithms, equations and programs that are built into the modeling software. There are a number of different widely accepted programs. And I'd like to make the comparison between looking at these two sets of coverage maps, those from myself and those from Verizon, and watching the weather forecasts when there's a hurricane coming, and they show spaghetti models that are predicting the behavior of the storm, and each model has slightly different algorithms for doing that prediction. And the thing is, all of those algorithms could be equally accurate, even though their spaghetti lines are going in different directions. And the same thing is true for the computer models that we look at in these hearings. Two models that look a little bit different could have similar accuracy, and I would say that they do. We calibrate our models using field data from drive tests, particularly in New England vegetation and terrain. So just like Verizon, our models are carrier class tools, and we do the same kind of tuning to make sure that they're as accurate as possible. What is important to understand.
My question really was, as I understood it, you were saying that their propagation model showed that there are gaps in their coverage. The coverage wasn't as good as they said it was going to be, and yet their drive test gave, if you will, real world experience that said from that 100-foot position where they put the transmitter, they would have the type of coverage that they are looking to do to make sure they're providing their customers with coverage that they need. You mentioned, and I want to give you a chance to answer that, but you say it's not apples to apples, but the town, as you testified just a few minutes ago, has not come forward and said to them, we would like to enter into an agreement, or we would like to see proposals for the two sites on Meeting House. So the applicant, as we know, is not in a position to just keep running tests from every site. So the question is, what have we got now that says that the coverage, based on their real world drive test, as they call it, seems to now indicate the coverage is complete?
I disagree. It doesn't indicate the coverage is complete. The applicant was shooting for residential coverage in Woodbridge around Route 63 and 67. And then it slowly moved its target. And now when the applicant is talking about the coverage it's getting from 100 feet at the proposed location at Route 67, it's simply in vehicle coverage. It's not in building residential coverage. So it's very frustrating to be working with a moving target. I think the fundamental thing to do is to look at my estimation of existing coverage with the proposed facility and existing coverage with the alternatives. And then if the applicant supplies it in additional information, to look at their existing coverage with proposed and their existing coverage with the alternative, and to see whether there is a material difference. This is not a race in the Olympics where 1/10 of a second means one person gets the gold medal and one person gets the silver. This is a situation where what we're looking for is a site that has the least impact on residents in the town. And the location at what I called 15 Meeting House Lane is more than 500 wooded feet from the nearest residences. And that is something that the folks that I'm working with think makes it a very promising opportunity. And we have a chicken and egg problem. Is if the applicant is pressing for the present facility, they're not going to go to the town and offer to do a drive test and ask for them to do an RFP for that alternate location, unless the council uses its weight to perhaps help the applicant take a closer look at these alternatives.
In many of the public comments, well, let me skip that question. I think I just want to go back to Mr. Logan and Ms. Godwell. We receive a lot of comments on almost every docket from various state agencies. And to the best of my knowledge on this particular one, we received nothing from the Council on Environmental Quality, the Department of Public Health, or the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection with regard to any of the potential impacts for this site. Do you have any reason to help me understand why they saw that there was no adverse impact that they felt they needed to comment upon with regard to the site?
Certainly, I can take a stab at that. This is George Logan for the record. As you probably know, since most of you have a lot of experience in this council, the kinds of things that DEP and Environmental Quality, Council of Environmental Quality look at is what is already documented. The natural diversity database will be one source. If there were, say, state forest next door, that would be another thing that they would look at. But looking at their GIS data and the data that they have, there was nothing that raised to a place where they needed to comment. So therefore, what usually happens in these kinds of situations is that the experts in the field, whether the applicants or, for instance, ourselves, are the ones that survey the properties, do the inventories, and come up with the information. And then if something comes up during that time, then that's reported to the DEEP.
Okay. I think, Mr. Morissette, with that, that's all the questions I have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edelson. Well, we're going to wrap this up for today. The council announces that it will continue the evidentiary session of this public hearing on Tuesday, September 21st, 2021 at 2 p.m. via Zoom remote conferencing. A copy of the agenda for the continued remote evidentiary hearing session will be available on the council's docket number 502 webpage, along with the record of this matter. The public hearing notice, instructions for public access to the remote evidentiary hearing session, and the council's guide to citing council procedures. Please note that anyone who has become a party or intervener, but who desires to make his or her views known to the council, may file written statements to the council until the record closes. Copies of the transcript of this hearing will be filed with the Woodbridge Town Clerk's Office. I hereby declare this hearing adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for participating.
Mr. Morissette,
Yes, Attorney Baldwin.
before you adjourn, I just want to make sure we have the breadth of the late file exhibits understood. If I could, the late file exhibit 1, which I have on my list, includes the input information that Mr. Ainsworth asked for, that Verizon put into the propagation models that it produced, including the location of surrounding sites, the heights, the power output from those sites, the antennas being used at each of those locations, the data that was input into their propagation model. That was late file exhibit number 1. Late file exhibit 2 are Verizon's propagation plots from 4 Meeting House Lane. The town parcel at 4 Meeting House Lane at 120 feet, I think, was the height that Mr. Shiban spoke to.
Yes, that is my understanding.
This is David Maxon. Can I provide coordinates for 140 feet at 15 Meeting House Lane?
I'm sorry, and the purpose for that is, Mr. Maxon?
The town is, I think, at least as interested in the 15 House Meeting House Lane site as it is the existing tower at the police station at 4 Meeting House Lane.
Well, that information wasn't specifically requested by any of the parties, so I'm going to have to say no. Now, if the applicant is agreeable to that, that's another thing. Attorney Baldwin?
I think we might as well cover both of the town-owned parcels. They are both parcels that the town has requested. So I don't know that we need coordinates, but if Mr. Maxon through Mr. Ainsworth wants to provide those to us, that would be fine.
Very good. Thank you. I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
Will do.
Okay, Attorney Baldwin, anything else?
No, that's it. I apologize for the interruption. I just wanted to get that confirmed before we went away today.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. That's a good thing to do.
Mr.
thanks for-
Morissette, I don't know if it'd be appropriate, but Mr. Maxon referred to a town of Lower Merion, Pennsylvania. I've tried to do a quick web search and I can find no information there. Obviously, that was done very quickly, but again, this council has spent a lot of time on looking at DAS as an alternative. A lot of people made public comment related to that. And I would ask if he has further information about that site, it would be great if he could share it with the council.
Well, I think the information should be filed for what it's worth, although it's not exactly relevant to this proceeding. But for informational purposes, if Mr. Maxim feels that he can file that information for our information purposes, we'll let him do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, very good, everybody. The hearing is now adjourned. Thank you. Have a good evening.